Someone sounding good isn't what makes it true. Something being the truth makes it true. There's only one truth. I'm pretty sure I've heard people say before that Jesus will still have holes in his hands and feet when we get to heaven, when we see him, as a reminder of his love for what he did for us. And I'm honestly not sure. Maybe there is, but as far as I'm aware, I don't think that there's any scripture that mentions that. If it is, please let me know. We're always learning. That would be very beautiful if it's true, and it sure sounds nice, but the truth isn't reality just solely on sounding right. Everyone will have perfect bodies in heaven. Obviously, no one's more perfect than Jesus. Jesus has a perfect body now. I mean, he's always been perfect. You know what I'm saying? It is perfect. Or is it perfect if he has holes in his hands and feet? I mean, sure, of course, God defines perfection, so if he wanted, he could do that. And maybe we will see him like that, with holes in his hands and feet when we're in heaven. Maybe he will always have that. Although that's just a lot to try and wrap our heads around, because, does he choose to keep the holes in his hands and feet, but, none of the other bruises or broken body parts? He was unrecognizable from all of the beating. You couldn't... They said they couldn't even tell if he was a girl or a guy. You have to be completely just annihilate. You know how bad that has to be to have no skin, nothing. Obviously, he's not gonna look that bad in heaven. Maybe he'll keep the holes in his hands and feet. He could. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just thinking out loud. At the end of the day, it's kind of irrelevant whether or not he has them. Just something fun, interesting to think about. So obviously, we don't need that to remember what he did for us. That's the whole gospel. We'll never forget the cross. That's why we're saved. That's why we're there. We'll never forget that. We don't need to see the holes to be reminded of it, because we'll never. That'll be the most important. That's the gospel. That's why we're saved, what he did for us. His love. God said his word will never go away. Right? So, that's the gospel. We'll always have his word, his truth. And that's amazing. So, yeah. Hope that blessed someone. Have a great day. Peace.